Hi, Dr. Jeff Goins here with another Dwarven Tavern video. This time we're talking about missile weapons. And this is a missile weapon, believe it or not. I mean, it's not rocket powered, but it is a missile if you do it right. And if you can do this with your dagger, it's not sharp enough. These are intended for close combat, right? Because it's got the little crossbar here for pressure with a thumb, so you can get in there and really give it a jab. However, when we're talking about missile weapons versus melee weapons, there's one very important factor that comes into play when you are dealing with it on the tabletop, and that is the critical hit. Because what we've come to figure out here at the tavern is that you don't need to have a plus 87 weapon to be epic when every strike you make is a critical hit. And if you watch any good samurai movie like the Lone Wolf Samurai, you will see that every hit, and this is the way it is in real life as well, and we try to capture realism whenever we can, is that every hit is supposed to be a critical hit. And with a melee weapon, not talking about any of the magical pluses or the feats like improved critical or whatever, with a melee weapon you have to roll a natural 20 to get a critical. And you know, in the old days, in version 1 and 2, a natural 20 was automatic double damage. And then we added the hit location table for fun and flavor. And then in 3.5 they had the critical threat, which kind of watered it down a little bit to me. To me, if you're, critical always hits, critical is always critical, double damage. That's just the way I play it. It's my house rules. But missile weapons, meaning thrown daggers, right, and axes, and anything that you can throw, is more dangerous in the air than it is in the hand. And we're going to show you why. Here is a demonstration of the depth to which a blade sinks when thrown versus when held in the hand with even a strong grip. Okay, so here's the outdoors. So here we are on the backyard, and we're talking about missile weapons. So these are Fairbairn Sykes close combat daggers used by close combat soldiers in the British service, and this is just a generic piece of metal that's shaped like a knife. This is designed for throwing. These are designed for close combat. But as missile weapons, how much more effective are they than melee weapons? We're going to demonstrate that right now. So with this guy, this is designed for throwing. So obviously it won't be able to be used as effectively as a melee weapon because it doesn't have much of a handle. But we're going to throw it and show you what it can do as a thrown weapon. So that's what it looks like when it's thrown effectively. Here is the Fairbairn Sykes.
There we go.
And we're going to take a close-up look and see just how deeply they penetrate. Here we are looking at the depth at which these sharpened steel fangs of death have penetrated. And that looks like about an inch, right? I would say. Okay, for this one. And probably close to the same, maybe 3/4 of an inch for this one. And then this one, Captain Dole Point, has gone in a little over, looks like 1/2 an inch. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to turn these blades over to Mongo the Melee guy. Mongo the Melee guy. And let him hit those stab them into the board as if it were a melee attack, and we'll compare the depth. So, do all three.
Okay.
With a mighty battle cry.
Oh. We're completely in the way now. I just got to stick that
Okay,
time.
let's get a close-up of that and see where the... We're going to get a close-up of that and see how far the tip's penetrated. About a 1/2 inch.
A 1/2 inch.
Back up. You know, 3/4 of an inch.
Okay.
Not bad at all. Like 1/4 inch.
1/4 inch, if not less.
Yeah. So, what this tells us is that while the one blade penetrated as deep as one of the ones thrown, the overall of these knives were that the thrown ones, the missile weapons penetrated deeper. So, how this equates in game is that when you're stabbing something, like when you're stabbing something, a natural 20 means a really good hit, like that 3/4 of an inch penetration that you got earlier. But when you are throwing a weapon, if it adds up to 20 or more, then that's a critical hit, because missile weapons are inherently there's greater momentum, there's greater force, there's the foot-pounds of pressure of it going in from a throw is generally greater. I mean, you can stab somebody to death with an arrow, but it's much easier if you got a bow. So if it adds up to 20 or more, it's a critical with missile weapons. Bows, well, not bows, with arrows, bolts, thrown daggers, spears, what have you. Those add up to 20 or more, that's a critical hit. If it's a melee weapon, it still needs to be a natural 20 to do the deed. So, back inside. Okay, so here we're back, and it just goes to show you when we were throwing the weapons, you could see that it was sinking in at a depth of perhaps 3/4 of an inch, whereas with the hand, it was sinking in much less. So, what does that mean? Well, organ penetration, A. There was a very famous German leader who said that he liked spikes on everything, because anything that penetrated the human body and subsequently the orcish body or the elven body or the ogre body, to a depth of 3 inches or more, would unerringly strike an organ, which is not entirely accurate, but it is closer to accurate. So if you're holding a dagger like this, and you go up against an armored knight or an armored orc or an armored anything, and you hit it with the hand, it's going to hurt you, actually, because these were very painful. And of course, you wouldn't even want to use one of these for a handheld, because this tip is fairly blunt, and it took a lot of effort to get it in this deep. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that if you have a missile weapon versus a melee weapon, natural 20 equals critical. With a missile weapon, anything that adds up to 20 or more should be considered a critical hit. And that's just because it is more likely that you're going to get a fairly deep amount of penetration. It's just going to naturally penetrate more. So whenever you're using a melee weapon, or you're throwing a guy like this, which I wouldn't unless it was an absolute necessity, unless I had like 6 more strapped to me, which is the same premise. This throne could legitimately go this deep or more into something versus this deep through armor if you're holding it. So the house rule for Dwarven Tavern is, and I'm not going to spin this one on my hand because it'll bore right into my desk from the back of my hand. It would go down there. So if you're using a melee weapon, natural 20 to hit a critical, to get a critical hit. When you're using these as missile weapons, zing, zang, anything that adds up to a 20 or more is a critical hit or a critical threat, however you want to play that part. But the important thing is that missile weapons are more dangerous and more apt to get a critical hit than a melee handheld weapon. So, a melee handheld weapon, that is not redundant at all. So, keep that in mind. Pack extra daggers because you're going to need to start throwing them. And this has been a Dwarven Tavern something or other. A talk, perhaps. House rules, maybe. Definitely house rules. So, on behalf of the whole cast and crew of the Dwarven Tavern, we wish for you to want for nothing but adventure. And at first I feared it, then I threw my daggers at it. And at first I feared it, then I charged. That's the thing. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.